Every man in 15 minutes enters the extraordinary spiritual world of a Hebridean priest whose parishioner's faith is moulded by the power of the elements and ancient Celtic beliefs. Now at 10:30, the news on BBC One with Michael Burke.
The Americans have shot down an Iraqi fighter that flew into the air exclusion zone over southern Iraq. Baghdad has threatened to respond in a suitable manner. And Israel refuses to take the Palestinians back as the weather closes in. Good evening. American fighters have shot down an Iraqi warplane over southern Iraq. It had flown into one of the two air exclusion zones declared by the Gulf War allies to protect the Kurds in the north and the Shiite Muslims in the southern marshes. Baghdad has said it reserves the right to respond in a suitable manner and at an appropriate time. According to the Pentagon, the incident began at 10:20 local time when two Iraqi MiG fighters crossed the 32nd parallel into the southern no-fly zone. The MiGs were challenged by American forces and withdrew. But 20 minutes later, two more Iraqi planes were spotted about 20 miles inside the zone. Two American F-16s issued a verbal warning, but the Iraqi planes turned to confront them. The Americans responded, shooting down one of the MiGs. The other escaped.
President Bush, continuing his holiday in Texas, said if Saddam Hussein sought to test American will during the period of political transition, the F-16 fighters sent him a clear message.
Well, I don't know what he's doing, but he made a big mistake, didn't he? Because we told him, the international community told him not to fly below the 32nd parallel, and he did it. And does it again, the same thing will happen. We're not threatening anybody, but we must enforce those resolutions.
Allied warplanes have flown thousands of missions over Iraq since the end of the Gulf War, but this is the first aerial combat. It comes after repeated U.S. intelligence reports of increased pressure from Baghdad against Kurds in the north and Shiites in the south.
I don't know how much one ought to read into this, but I must say that it seems to me part of a pattern over the last several months of increasing Iraqi aggressiveness and challenging the UN, both in terms of the inspections and in terms of the relief efforts.
The Baghdad government's attacks on its own rebellious people after the Gulf War led the United Nations to declare a no-fly zone over Kurdish areas, enabling Allied forces to offer large-scale humanitarian relief. Then last August, another no-fly zone was declared over Shiite territory in the south, effectively limiting Saddam Hussein's power to central Iraq, which he refused to accept. Early this month, U.S. intelligence spotted Iraqi troops massing in the north, followed by the harassment of UN teams and the destruction of 6 relief trucks. Saddam Hussein said today he wants to reassert his authority in the north, and on the aerial clash, Iraq reserved the right to respond after their aircraft were attacked by the Evil Alliance while on routine patrol over national soil. Saddam Hussein has repeatedly misread the United States, and far from Bill Clinton being a soft touch, a confrontation with America's least loved foreign dictator would allow the new commander-in-chief a chance to demonstrate his power. Gavin Esler, BBC News, Washington.
Israel has rejected a plea from a United Nations Special Envoy to take back more than 400 expelled Palestinians. James Jonah met Israeli ministers in an attempt to break the deadlock over the men who've been stranded in southern Lebanon for 11 days. Israel's Supreme Court has given its government 72 hours to respond to a petition to overturn the ban on the Red Cross taking supplies to the exiled Palestinians.
Conditions at the deportees' camp are colder than ever, though the weather has brought with it some relief. The snow which has settled on the ground has been welcomed by the Palestinians as a gift from God. They have no fresh water, and the snow, stored and melted, should keep them going. But although there are reports of some food being smuggled in, there's no sign of any proper supplies being allowed. In Israel and the occupied territories, there have been further protests to focus world attention on the plight of the expelled Palestinians. These are Israeli Arabs outside the Prime Minister's office. The demonstrations were also a greeting for the United Nations envoy James Jonah, whose first meeting was with the Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres. Afterwards, Mr. Perez was in conciliatory form.
We are in a mood to cooperate with the United Nations. We shall do so. We think it's a positive and a friendly organization.
Mr. Jonah has also seen the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Almost certainly he will have found Mr. Rabin less willing to compromise. Tensions within the cabinet persist and could well intensify, with the Supreme Court telling ministers that there's to be a new hearing on the legality, not of the expulsions, but on the question of refusing humanitarian aid. The two issues are separate in the minds of many Israelis who regard the expulsions as justified, but the policy of refusing relief as excessively harsh. As the daily battles continue between Palestinians and the Israeli security forces, some at least are looking for ways of reducing tension. Justin Webb, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Here, a Home Office inquiry will start tomorrow into the riot at a remand centre at Reading, which involved nearly 50 young inmates. 3 officers were hurt and taken to hospital. The inquiry will consider reports that too few officers were on duty because of the holiday, and previous complaints by the Reading Board of Prison Visitors that the building was unsuitable for young prisoners.
The recreation centre bore the brunt of the riot. It started here after 48 inmates refused to return to their cells. The well-equipped block was wrecked within minutes. After injuring the 3 officers and stealing keys, prisoners moved to other areas, including the computer room, causing hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of damage. Fires were lit in the gymnasium and the kitchens. Some inmates commandeered a rubbish truck, ramming it into a gate, but the escape attempt failed. Reading became a remand centre last year. Plans to make it one of the most liberal institutions for young prisoners have been set back.
Oh, we're disappointed. We tried to provide a good regime for the young people we have locked up, and they've abused it.
The board at Reading has written to the Home Secretary, it's spoken to the area manager, and its annual report contains a reference to the fact that Reading, being an old Victorian and somewhat depressing inside, is not really a suitable place to contain unsentenced 17 to 21-year-olds who are very, very volatile.
150 prison officers regained control 3 hours later after moving in to overpower those inmates still inside. As the damage was assessed today, the Home Office refused to comment on reports that only around a dozen prison officers were on duty at the time. Inmates involved could now face charges of assault, arson and the new offence of prison mutiny.
The policeman leading the inquiry into the murder of a 14-year-old Norfolk girl says he's hunting a brutal, unfeeling killer. Joanna Young's body was found near Watton, 20 miles from Norwich. She'd suffered a severe head injury and had drowned in a pit filled with water. Ian Davis reports.
14-year-old Joanna, who was described by police as a happy, carefree schoolgirl with no family problems, left her parents' house on Wednesday evening. After she failed to return home by the following morning, her family became concerned. Her partially clothed body was discovered by police yesterday evening in a water-filled pit at the bottom of a country lane just a mile from her home.
The body was found when a member of the public yesterday afternoon, whilst walking his dog, came across a pair of shoes which were later identified as belonging to Joanna. As a result of that, a police search was mounted, and at 8:20 p.m. last night the body was discovered.
Joanna's underclothes were also found about 200 yards from her body, although a pair of jeans she was wearing are still missing. Police believe the motive for the attack was probably sexual.
Representatives of the 2 main warring factions in Somalia have been holding detailed discussions on how to bring an end to the fighting in the capital, Mogadishu. Their leaders met yesterday at the residence of the American Special Envoy and promised to dismantle the green line that divides the city.
The 2 sides arrived for today's meeting in separate groups from opposite ends of this divided city. The only thing they have in common is the need to get on with the Americans who brought them together. But afterwards they announced an end to their fighting and made this joint appeal to the international forces.
We request the American government and those other countries who are participating in the Restore Hope operation to disarm our people.
But that will be easier said than done. There are arms hidden all over this city, and many gunmen have no intention of giving up the fight. The only thing preserving the peace is the military, and many aid agencies are worried that when the Americans leave, the United Nations will not be able to cope.
I am concerned that not enough thought has been put into the transition
for UNISOM to maintain the continuity in terms of bringing about improved security.
Tomorrow, the Green Line, which separates the warring factions of Mogadishu, will be abolished, extending the Marines' control even further. Dismantling the Green Line in one day is a largely symbolic gesture. Ending the bitter hatred between Somalia's rival clans will take much longer. Tom Carver, BBC News, Mogadishu.
The Indian government is going to take over the controversial holy site at Ayodhya, which is claimed by both Hindus and Muslims. A mosque which stood on the site was destroyed by Hindu extremists 3 weeks ago, which led to widespread communal violence. The government now says that a new mosque and a temple are to be built in the area, and the site's future will be referred to the Supreme Court. British troops have again come under fire in Bosnia. No one was hurt in the latest attack near Kladanja. Serb forces fired 3 mortar shells at a convoy of armoured personnel carriers, but none was hit. The soldier wounded yesterday, who's now out of hospital, has been speaking about what happened.
I don't know how to feel, actually. In some respects, I feel rather silly in that I was caught up in it. When you should always take account that incoming rounds have right away. I think I was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
UN officials in Bosnia are holding an inquiry following allegations that much of the international food aid going to Sarajevo is being stolen by armed factions in and around the city. It's thought that as much as 3/4 of the food brought in by road and air may never reach the civilians for whom it's intended.
Food for a hungry city. Today, something like 475 tons of supplies were brought in by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Enough to provide every man, woman and child here with a roughly adequate diet for a day. The trouble is, at some stage after it leaves the UN warehouses, a great deal of it just disappears.
A war situation where you have thousands of people with guns who can disrupt food supplies at any level of distribution, it's difficult to ensure that the food is getting to where it's most needed. We're trying to turn this around.
Yet this isn't Somalia, where people came in and stole by force. Here, the food vanishes during the distribution process. Some is quietly taken by the Bosnian government to feed the army and to put in store. But much more disappears privately in the distribution system. Until a recent police clampdown, a lot of UN food ended up in this market. Now most of the stores are empty, though this man was selling UN oil at £10 a bottle. But it's in the bureaucracy that most food disappears. Many people who come to the distribution centres are only entitled to small amounts. The rest goes to the bureaucrats and their friends. In a siege, it's every man for himself, but the losers are those without money or connections. In one tiny flat without power or water, Aida Nikšić struggles to keep her sick child alive. They've had one single food ration in 20 days, and she doesn't expect any more for a month. These are the people the UN food is really meant for. It isn't reaching them. John Simpson, BBC News, Sarajevo.
And tonight's main news again, the Americans have shot down an Iraqi fighter that flew into the air exclusion zone over southern Iraq. Baghdad has threatened to respond in a suitable manner. A short time ago, President-elect Bill Clinton said he was committed to UN sanctions against Iraq, and he supported the efforts to bring Iraq into line. That's all from the newsroom. Good night.
Hello, our high pressure is still there, still wrecking our television reception, still giving dry weather too, with just at the moment enough wind in the circulation to keep fog a relatively minor problem. Well, you're not doing so badly over Britain at the moment, much better than the central basin of the Mediterranean. Palermo, for example, in the last 24 hours, 93 millimetres of rain, and more to come, more wind as well. Back in Britain, a dry night, perhaps no more than the odd spot of drizzle in the Hebrides there, a lot of cloud, one or two patches of fog, but nothing particularly widespread as we go through the night. In many places, temperatures dipping a little bit below freezing. Even the normally blessed Jersey there, it's below freezing there now. In most places, -1 and -2 Celsius by the end of the night. Not particularly cold, except in a few Scottish glens. tomorrow, a lot of clouds to start with, one or two patches of fog too, the fog clearing away during the course of the morning, and then the clouds gradually thinning out in most places, become quite bright in many areas, except perhaps northwest Scotland, later northwest Ireland. Here's some thicker patches of cloud. Again, rather a cold day, but less windy tomorrow in the south, so fog may be more of a problem tomorrow night in many parts of the British Isles. But again, nonetheless, a cold day, temperatures between 3 and 5 Celsius in the afternoon. That's the chart for Tuesday. The high moving slowly away. These fronts bringing a windy start to 1993. And so Tuesday, mostly dry, bright, one or two patches of freezing fog, but more rain and cloud getting into the west later on in the day. That's it. Good night to you.